Hey folks, good morning, good evening. I'm here with yet another video for you all. So what we are going to do here today is we are trying to build a price tracker application, which is essentially a web monitor where you can monitor web pages, check them for changes. So before we get started, I just wanted to show you how this application works. So this is what the application will look like when we are done building it. What you do here is you go to any site. Suppose you want to track the price of an item on Amazon. You just copy the X path, which is nothing but kind of a path to the element that you are trying to monitor. You put the URL and start using it. So what it does is it fetches the price for you and will show you the price. And of course, you can add it as a tracker in this application, and the application will constantly keep monitoring it after a certain amount of intervals. So if you see here, the price got updated as 429, and I added it to the tracker here, and I can start checking it. And every 1 hour, it will go check the price. If there's a change in the price, it will let you know. So it will let you know by Windows notifications as well as notification to your phone. How we will do that is what we learn in this tutorial today. So we start with Windows. So this will be a Windows application which we're trying to build using C Sharp. So we start with the Windows application type of project is Visual Studio. Of course, there's not a Visual Studio or Windows application tutorial, so I'm not going to details of that. But if you have questions, do let me know in the comment section and I can make a video for that too. But essentially what we are doing is we are starting with a blank form, and from the tooltips, rather the toolbox that we have on the left, you pick up the items that you want to put on the form. Suppose there are labels, there are text boxes, which we just saw that would come up in our final application. We gradually build that form here step by step by step. So once the form is ready, it looks something like this. Okay, now here what I did is I put a placeholder for name. There's one for URL where you will be putting the website URL. In our case, it will be Amazon. And then you have the selector where you put the XPath. So XPath, as I told, is nothing but a hierarchical path to the element that you are trying to get data from. And you have a box at the bottom, or rather a table, where you add the elements that you want to track. So I added a few columns into this table. As you can see here, we have the name of the item, which gets from that box there. We have the previous price, you have the current price, and it also has some regarding when it last checked and when it last got a change, which was updated. Next, we have this test button, which helps us to check whether the name, URL, and the selector is working fine or not. We also have this form load method, which actually runs when the form is first created. So what we do is here, if you see the table here, which is all left aligned, all the columns, we distribute it evenly using this piece of code. I'm just checking the whole code and just making the size accordingly so that it fits the entire width of the table there. Now let's come to the automation part of things. For that, we are going to use Selenium, which is a kind of industry standard and a very famous automation tool. What we are going to do is we need to download some of the drivers for Chrome, because what we are trying to do here is Selenium will actually go and make a call to the site that you're configuring using Google Chrome and try to get the data. So you need to match it with the driver version with the Chrome version that you're using. In my case, I'm using 113 version, so that's what I'm going to download. So download is nothing but a simple zip file, which has an executable inside it. If you just open it, you will see this Chrome driver.exe. You'll just copy this and paste it into our Chrome's directory, which is inside Program 86, inside Google. There will be a folder for Chrome. We just scroll there and paste it right here inside application. So this is where you need to place this file. So once that is done, we are all done in terms of setup of Selenium. So before we move forward with the coding part of things and integrating it with Selenium, there are three libraries that we'll be using in this project that you need to get it from NuGet packages. So these are the three libraries, as you can see. You can just search by these names and you will get it. So JSON will be used for storing our trackers into the file system, and these two are Selenium related, which will be used for using Chrome to actually access the site and extract data. Coming back to the form, next we will code for this test button. So this is something important, guys. We need to pay attention here. So we need to build this Chrome options object, which is part of the Selenium packages that we just installed. And then what you do is you add this argument as headless, so which will run it behind the scenes. So for now, just to show you, I'll just comment these out so that we can see how it actually works. And then we create this Chrome driver service, which actually integrates with the Chrome and makes it happen. So I commented a few other lines of code just to show you how it happens. Also note here, I'm also passing the URL below here to the Selenium controller. Now let's go to the actual site of the URL and try to get the XPath out of it. So I will be using the smart plug as an example. So I'm using a plugin in Chrome called the Selector Hub plugin, which you can download from Chrome Extension Store. What it does is makes it easier to extract the XPath. You just select the item that you want to monitor, go to the Selection Hub context menu and get the XPath out of it. Once you get the XPath, you come back to the code and use the XPath in this line of code. So don't worry about the lines of code. I will upload everything into a GitHub. You can download and download from the repository and check how it works. So now what I'm doing here is I'm adding on the top an argument to use my Chrome's login when the Chrome is opened. So let's test the application now. I hit the button. If you see here, it opened the Chrome by itself. I minimize that, and in a short while you will see the mount is here now. So the extraction was successful. However, the Chrome did open up. That is something that we will get rid of by uncommenting these lines of code, which will make it run totally silent and you won't be able to notice that something is going behind the scenes. Let us run it one more time and check how it works with in a silent mode. So I hit the test button now. You can see no browser windows popped up here. Everything is happening silently behind the scene, yet it fetches the amount for us like last time. So this works fine. So back in the code, if you see the URL part of things, you might have noticed a shortened URL before. So this is the whole URL which is there in the browser. What you can also do is you hit the share button on the page that you want to monitor. You copy the link from here. It basically does the same thing, but it gives you a much more shortened URL, which is easier to manage rather than this big long URL that we have. So you can see it's just a small URL. Let us quickly check whether it still works fine. Closing the browser window and let's get it running. So test it again. Yes, worked fine. So before we move forward, I just want to bring your attention towards this piece of line of code. On line number 95, if you see what I'm doing here is I'm trying to fetch the Chrome login details or the Chrome profile that I have on my local machine for making this call to Amazon, okay, or for that matter, any site. The reason for that is if you are not logged in from your profile, you might get different results on Amazon because when you hit Amazon from this automation piece, it will think that you are a new user and it may show you a different page with a different login button maybe. So that changes the structure of the document and your XPath may stop working. So it is important that you write this piece of code, which will of course vary with your account name in your local computer. But this is important that you put this line of code so that it makes it feel that you are opening the Chrome and not this automation tool is opening a new fresh instance of Chrome. So for the next part, what we'll have to do is for now we have hard coded this URL as well as the selector XPath expression. So what we'll have to do is here we'll have to fetch it from what user is entering here on the form controls. So that is what I'm going to do next. So I replace it with their respective controls text property. That's what it gets the data from. I replace the XPath also with the txt selector dot text expression where we are capturing the data for the selector. So once that is done, we are set here because now it will be dynamic based on what you are entering on the screen. I put the span here for our testing purposes for the time being. And let me go and fire this one more time. So now if you see, I can very much copy this URL here and paste it in my application in the URL section. And then similarly for the selector, what we had last time, we can just copy this from here and put it back to our selector control text box. And you can give a name if you want, but let me just go ahead and put some name here, smart plug tracker, and let's hit the test button. So now if you see this time, it's taking the inputs from the data that we have entered here. Now let's see how we can save the data into our table so that we don't need to enter it every time. So we go back here. Now we'll program for this add button to work. So double click on that. Here, before we can add, we make a simple class which will hold the data for us. It's more of an entity class. It has all the parameters that are required. And we also have a flag for change parameter, which will indicate that the value has changed. What I do is on click of the add button, I am adding uh, to the list. We have created a list of tracker item object type. And when we double click on this, all that we are doing is we are creating an object for the tracker item with the values from the controls and adding it to the list. Then we make two calls. We have two functions that we have written, a sync list function. Let's see what it does first. So what we are doing here is for each of the items in the list that we have created called trackers, we are adding it to um, our on-screen list, which we just saw. So it will add it to the list that we have on the screen. And then what we also see is once the addition is done, we also need to save the record, right? So we are using this function called refresh records. What we are doing is if there's a file called data.json on the same location where our exe is, I'm deleting that and I'm writing a new file with all the latest records which my table has. So that's where the Newton's of JSON comes into play. It serializes the object with the items of the list that we have added on click of the add button. And the same goes and gets saved into a data.json file. Now, when the application starts, right, when the form is created, what we are doing is if we see that the file exists, data.json, we read all our elements from that data.json file. And if it does exist, we want to deserialize from the file and store it into our items collection. Okay. And if it doesn't exist, we create a new list here. So what it will do now is if there's previous data that we have already saved, it will show it on the screen when we start the program, or else it will just show a blank list. Now let's talk about this remove button. This remove button, what we are doing is the list which is being shown on the screen in the table gives a property called selected indexes. With that, I'm removing the items that you have selected uh, through this loop. What we are doing is for each of the selected index, we are removing it and then calling the sync list method, which we discussed before, to update the data into the table as well as store it in the file so that it's always up to date with what's shown on the screen. Let's try this out now. So here you can see that we have again the name field. Let's call it Amazon Smart Plug Tracker. Okay, and then we take the URL again. We put the URL back to our UI, the URL field, as well as the selector like last time is the same selector we are going to use. Copy the whole thing and we put the selector here. This time we can quickly test and make sure that it's still working fine. It does, so I will add it to my list. Once you add it, it gets saved to my actual disk. And now here, if you see the columns here, these are all empty because it has never run before. So now we'll see how we can start checking and what this slider does. So what this slider does is it has properties. You can just browse through those, but one of the most important one is value. That is the initial value that you have to be set. I've set it to 4 so that it stays in the middle. It has value from 0 to 8. I've set it to 4 so that it sets to the middle when we first load the form. And if you go inside, whenever you scroll it, I'm checking the value of the track bar here to make sure we set it accordingly. So it spans from 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and so on. So 4 sets it to 1 hour. I've set it to those many milliseconds that are there in 1 hour. So let's run it now. So here you can see this, you can scroll it and then the subsequent value shows up. In what frequency it will go and check for change in values for the items you are tracking. So whenever you scroll the scroll bar here, it sets the frequency attribute of the data refresher class, which we'll cover next. And that is used when we hit the start checking button on our UI. So what essentially it does is it starts a thread. We will start a new thread. In that thread, what we will do is we will use this attribute and make sure that we are only hitting Amazon or any other site to get the update when those amount of millisecond has elapsed between the last time you checked and this time. This is important because if you try hitting these sites far too often, then they will identify it as a threat. And what they will do is they will block your access or they will show a captcha, which of course your automation tool or our application cannot handle. So it is very important that you do not hit the sides too often, like several times in a second or so, then you might get into trouble. So that's why we have set up these different frequency parameters, which you can fine tune. And there's no point checking it every second or so, right? I mean, price won't change that often. It's not Bitcoin price after all, right? So you can check it once a day, once an hour if you want. But I mean, keep that in mind when you are trying to hit and make sure even when you're testing, make sure you're not calling it within a loop which is not controlled. Then you will again end up hitting it far too often. So now let's get into the back end of this start checking button, right? So what this button does is it checks for the label of this button and either starts checking it or stops checking it. Now, when you go back to the UI, what happens is this data refresher class actually gets the data. And what happens there is depending on the frequency that you have set up, it calls the automation process that we just set up and gets the data and populates into the table here, which we have just set up, and it tells you, okay, so this was the previous value, this is the current value, and if the value has changed, we intend to throw an alert for the user so that they can be notified. So here, if you can see, I'm starting a thread here, and let's get into this class and understand how this thread is going to run, right? So let's get to the data refresher class next. So what this class contain is the backend code when your thread runs. Okay, so your thread actually runs this code. So this code keeps running until this keep running flag, which you can see on line number 18, is on. And then what we do is here we do the basically the same thing that we did for the test button there. So I just copied the code from there to here. So once you come here, what we do is we check for the frequency if that much amount of time has elapsed, which you set in the slider there. And then if the keep running flag is on, which we control from the UI. So what we will do is we will continue running this, right? The for each loop here for each of the items. So we will start the Selenium WebDriver, which will in turn open the Chrome and get the data for us. This will happen in a loop for each and every element for the frequency that you have set using our slider here. So the data refresher also reads the frequency from, if you see, we have this frequency flag here. This is the flag that actually drives how frequently this check is going to happen. So once the elapsed time has passed, we get into the code. Now let's get into what happens inside this for loop. So if you see here, for each of these items, once the call has returned from the URL which is set to the item, what we do is we find the element depending on what you have set in the XPath. And if the item has changed, right? If the previous value with the current value is different, then what we do is we flag this whole item as its value has changed. So this flag for change attribute is actually used to update it in the UI as well as throw the alarm. And here, if you see here, we are also marking at what is the last time it was checked, immaterial of whether it changed or not. And then at the end, what we are doing is we are also doing some exception handling and calling form.update records. So form.update records, let's go there next. But then before that, we go to sleep. The thread goes to sleep for 5 seconds and then comes back and check over and over the same thing again and again. Now let's talk about what this update record does. Now it's important to understand that you cannot, from a different thread, update the UI directly. That's prohibited. Okay. So you need to use a delegate here, which you can see here. We are doing a begin invoke method call where we are saying that, okay, inside this method, the delegate actually calls the two methods that we have discussed before, the sync list, which actually updates the table on the screen, as well as the refresh method, which actually updates the data into our file system. So now let's do some testing here because now we have everything set up for this to work. So what we will do is we'll go and find this data.json file. This data.json file is where our data is getting stored whenever you hit the add button in our UI and add a tracker to our system. Right. So you can open this file in Visual Studio, just double click that. It will be a JSON file, as you can see, and its previous values are all not applicable because it never ran. So the application has loaded and you can see the value from the file is loaded here. Before we hit start checking, let's add another item to the list just to make sure that it runs for each and every item that we have added in the system. So I go back to Amazon this time. I like this iPad and I want to track the price of this item because I want to buy it when it's cheapest. So this time I will add it the other way you can do it without using the plugin if you want. You can also go to developer tools and select the XPath from there. So I put the XPath here and same way I copy the link and put it in the URL section and I test the value is coming fine. I now go ahead and add it. So for adding, I have this add button. I will go ahead and click that. The item is added here. Now, if I go back to the file where it's getting stored, if I click here, you see there's a new record that has gotten added with the new item. Okay. So now what we will do is we will go back and now this time start, hit the start button so that it can continuously start checking after every 1 hour. So let me hit this. So as you can see, first time it has never checked before, everything is NA. So it will get the alert for the first time because it will see, yeah, price has changed, right? Because it was NA before. So if you see here, I had set up a breakpoint here. So for each of these items, if you see there are two items here, our thread is running and identifying whether the price has changed or not changed, right? So I will let it go from here on and check whether the value gets updated into our table on the screen. So please remember, so far we have not added anything to show us notifications. We will move there next. And while we wait for the value to be refreshed, here it comes. So you can see the previous value was NA. Now the current value has set. The last check time and the last change time has changed to the current time. So now every 1 hour, it will continue doing the same thing. Now let's move to notification part of things. We add two notification icons from the left toolbox. What it does is the first one is a minimization uh, notification. What it does is if you minimize your application because it will be always running, right? We want something like this. If I hit the minimize button, I don't want it to take space here. Instead, show a banner like this. Right. So let's see how we can achieve that. So we stop the application. As I said, I added two of the notification icons from the toolbox and let's go to the code behind the notification, minimize notification. So there, what you need to do for the form resize event of the form, if the window state is minimized, that means you are minimizing, then hide the window and then notify user that, hey, blah, 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 this will continue running. So we'll continue testing it in background. So it will show a pop-up from your near the clock there. And then uh, the other thing is you also want that, okay, if I click on the icon here, the application needs to be maximized, right? So when that happens, when you double click on that notification icon, you want to show the window and make the window as normal, right? So that's what we are doing in this part. Now, the second part of notification is when you want to notify user of actual change in price. So for that, what we'll do is we'll use the other notifier that we added, and we will put a notification when actually the item gets changed. So we'll use this sync list method that we had created before and put this piece of code there. So what this piece of code does is for each and every item, while it is adding it to the tracker, it will also check if the flag for change is set, which we had set from the thread code that we covered some time back. If the flag for change is true, then we use the other notification icon to be popped up and say that, hey, you know what, this item has changed. You need to take a look. Okay, so now let's see how this works all together. And let me just to mock up the data, let me change the current val as let's set it to 90 for testing. And now for the other item also, let me change it to 500 so that it triggers a change alarm. I run the application now. Let me just minimize Visual Studio so that we can see it clearly. As you can see here, the price got changed. If you see first time it checked, it said like, okay, you know what? The current price is this, and the previous value was 90. So that's a notification for you. Once this notification is done, it also notifies about the other item has also changed because we had set the value as 500 before. Since both the notifications are working, let's now try the other one. Let's minimize the window and you can see it shows it's running in background, and we will just try to open it from the taskbar here, double click, and our application comes back. You can always hit the close button to get out of the application. Now let's get back to our final part of the project. What we want to do is we want to send a notification to your mobile when you are getting notified on your desktop as well. For that, we are going to use something called IFT. If you have not used IFT, please use it. Please browse it. There are a lot of things that you can explore here. What it basically does is it tells if this, then that, right? So if this, then that. So for if this, you add a event, and then what to do, you add an action. So here for our purpose, we will search for webhooks. So what we are going to do is we are going to set up a webhook where we will call, it can receive a web request. You can call that URL, and what it will do is it will let if know that this event has happened, and it will trigger that event. Let's call the event as price underscore alert, and we can just hit the create trigger button here. And then what we want to do is if this happens, what we want to do, we want to be notified on our mobile device, right? So we can choose the notification and say that, okay, if you have the IFT app installed on your mobile, it will throw a message in notification for you. So here in the message, we'll make it a little bit easier to understand. Price change detected. So check your trackers. So this will notify user that one of your items has changed. You complete creating the if trigger this way, and you can name it something more friendly as well. I'm calling it price change alert, and you hit finish. So once you hit finish, the only thing remaining is configuring your webhook. So for that, you can click on the webhook icon on the top. It will take to your specific webhook integration page. On the documentation page, on the top, you will see your key. This is your unique account identifier and the event name. So the event name needs to be the name that we just created, which is price underscore alert. Don't worry, I've changed the key. So even if you see this, it's not a problem for me. You can go ahead and hit this. Now, if you see this, I just hit it in the browser and I'm showing my mobile phone side by side. You see the notification just came through. So what you can also do is anytime go back and view activity. This will tell you when the applet ran and it triggered the webhook and showed the notification on your phone. So this shows that the webhook or the integration worked correctly. Now all that is pending to do is use this URL in our code. So for that, we'll just make a simple HTTP request. We'll do a get async request, and we'll put the same URL that we just created here, price alert, and then we'll just call it from here. Okay, so that's all you need for the IFT integration, which will enable the mobile phone notification. So now this time, let me close Visual Studio altogether. And now let's go ahead and make the mock change again here. Let's call it the previous value to something else and save it. And then what we'll do is we'll just run our application and see how it works. So we'll do the start checking button. Let me close this window out. And what we'll also do is once it starts checking, we will minimize the application as well. So here we go. So our minimization notification works fine. Let's wait for a bit for the actual alert to come in. So there it comes, and I put my phone here too, and it comes on the phone as well. Remember, we just changed one item, so we'll not get any more alerts. And you can double click on the application and the application comes up on the screen, and you can see the updated amount has been updated for the smart plug. So that's all for this video, guys. I hope you liked it, and if you did, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. That helps a lot, and this also enables me to bring such videos for you in future and many more such fun projects. Thank you and have a good day.